developed in college, actually. And it incorporates photography, found photography, watercolor, and oil paint in a single canvas, using a computer, a scanner, a printer, but mostly my own hands. And so what I do is I begin with vintage 35mm slides from the 60s, typically, and I make scans of them into the computer. I print those images onto rice paper, and then I start to build up what is the first painting, which is a watercolor study. I use colored pencil and gouache and watercolor, and I make a little 7-inch study. And all of the paintings are comprised of 7-inch squares. So the little studies that I make are that size, those 7 inches. And what I do is I scan that study into the computer and I enlarge it to the size of the canvas. And then the same way I printed photograph onto rice paper, I print that watercolor study, the enlargement, onto rice paper again. The whole thing is gridded, glued to the canvas, sealed, and then painted in oil. So when you guys are here, standing in front of one of the paintings, you're looking at an oil painting that's painted atop a sealed enlargement of a watercolor that was a small watercolor that was originally a photograph. It's ridiculous.
I told you intensive.
But anyway, the reason that I do that is sort of because I'm interested in an image and its different incarnations as a photograph, as a watercolor, as an oil painting, and the different scale changes that it can take. So an image has a certain life as a photograph, and the photographs that I use are typically discarded family photographs that sort of occupy a strange place in everyone's lives. They're sort of throwaways unless they mean something to you. So it's about this process of taking something that really doesn't mean anything except to the people who shot it or were in it, and then sort of dragging it away from those original photographic beginnings into these big oil paintings in the museum that mean something totally different.
So, who's the soccer?
The soccer images were really appealing to me. I found a few in one group that had these problems, and the subject of the show is the problems that are specific to film photography that have been sort of done away with by digital. So things like double exposures and light leaks and lens flares. You see a big light leak and then an internal reflection of the lens, and a big flare right there, and a double exposure down on the end. So all these kind of problems that were specific to film that now with digital cameras you don't really have anymore. So it was about pulling out those little problems and sort of celebrating in paint. Again, we're talking about photographic problems done as paintings. Celebrating those kind of happy accidents. The soccer images were kind of secondary. I loved them. They were sort of beautiful, and some of them were really energetic. Some of them were kind of really sad and lonely. They had a lot of the art historical echoes that I needed. I saw a lot of Degas in these moving figures in uniform and motion. So yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking.
And the film edges?
And the film edges. So just to round out the spectrum of what the show is, you have some soccer images, you have totally unrelated Old Faithful diptych with this color flare in the corner. The far end of that spectrum is the film edge pieces, which are quite literally the end of the roll of film where the photograph ends, and that's sort of a processing flaw. So I rotated them and made them into landscapes, and this is just quite literally the film with no image on it. So yeah, they belong in the series because they're the flaws that the subject of the show is. And they're yellow and purple, which is a nod to film, which when it goes bad goes yellow.
What interests you about photography?
Good question. Photography is so complicating. It's so important to us, and it's also something that really colors the way that we remember our lives. And as someone who collects, vintage photographs, I see how people photograph their lives, and it's in these really specific categories. So it's so interesting to me to see, like, I find whole sections of just like family reunions where you only take your camera out during a special occasion. So it's just so interesting to see how people document their lives. But photography for me, I mean, I find a picture of myself as a child, I think, oh, that was my favorite dress. It definitely wasn't. And the toy that was sitting next to me, I must have played with that forever, and it was completely in the frame by mistake. So we put all of these things and all this importance into the details of photography. So as a painter, to kind of undo some of that, or to, I don't know, to maybe cement it even more in paint is complicated and rich and interesting to me. So yeah, and my dad's a photographer. He's right there. So I grew up with photography. So yeah, my grandfather's a painter, my dad's a photographer. So it all kind of swirled around in there, and then this came out.
Why do you keep the border on the edges of your canvases? That's not sort of that photographic, but
sure. It's a really good question. I call them kind of the gutters. And as I said in the description of the process, the canvases are, all the tiles are individual pieces of paper. So they overlap slightly, so if you go up and look at them carefully, there's a seam with each paper. So cumulatively, the whole image shrinks a little bit.
Do you paint the tiles separately, or do you put them together first?
They're put together first. Yeah, they're put together first,
Sorry, wow.
sealed, and then painted as well. So if you look at the edges of the paintings, they become really important because you see what the paint looks like without the benefit of the underpainting, which is the watercolor beneath it.
While they have some of these errors, like the